What up, everybody? Hey, so I was going to plant and transplant the tomato plants today, but yeah, it didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is because these crazy things just keep growing taller and taller and taller and taller. I mean, it's crazy. I know my fluorescent lights aren't powerful enough to kind of, I don't want to stunt the growth. I definitely don't want to do that, but it's getting pretty crazy in here. It's getting crazy out here in these tomato plants. I don't have a pot deep enough. And really, there's no point in transplanting them if I don't have a pot that's deep enough. Yeah. So let me show you real quick. Let me just show you what they look like. So here they are right here. So you see that? I mean, let me move this thing over. There's my eggplant back there. That eggplant is just mind-blowing to me. This is the first year I've ever planted eggplant. This is the Black Beauty variety, and I just went and got some burpee seeds. They're organic, but anyway, enough about that. Back to the tomatoes. Look at these tomatoes. So look at the stem on these things. I mean, this cup is... Oh, you know what? That's a grape tomato, too. That's a grape tomato. Which one is this one? I mean, that's a grape tomato, too. These things are like growing all the way up to the top of the lights. I mean, look at my chains. I mean, it's getting to the point to where I'm not really going to have much more chain to drop these, and it's already kind of leaning on a tilt. So, I mean, I really need to get these out, but I don't know, man. This is going to be crazy. So that's like about a 7-inch tall styrofoam cup. And these bad boys are growing like crazy, man. So really, if I was even going to transplant these, I want to transplant that much of the stem in the ground, but I don't have a pot that freaking big. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's a good 12 inches. That's a good 12, 14 inches deep right there. And there's no point. I mean, if I had a 12, 14 inch deep pot, I mean, that's a pretty massive pot. And there's no point in doing that, I mean, in my opinion, yet, because I mean, what am I going to do with all these big, massive pots? I mean, and then, when I do get ready to transplant them outside next week, what is this? Don't tell me this one is getting... Hold on. Let me move this grape tomato out the way. See, man, this grape tomato, too, is doing the same thing. It's getting these little... What is those little bumps on there? Can y'all see that? I don't know if y'all can see that or not. I mean, it's like little bumps, and they're not like they're not like bugs. It's like getting on there. I don't know. I mean, maybe I need to cut that one off because I don't want it to infect the rest of the plant. But let me just take this grape tomato out real quick. I'm going to show y'all what I'm going to do. This thing is freaking lanky, man. Look at that. I mean, that bad boy is lanky. But that's okay. That's okay, because when I get outside, You know what? I'm going to try to harden these bad boys off and try to get them out there probably Sunday. I got to get these out there. But the problem is that it's windy. So I'm going to have to stake them somehow. But check this out. I just want to explain something real quick. So if you've got some tomatoes that look like this, and if you've started tomatoes indoors, I know you've probably faced this problem, is what I'm going to have to do with this one is when I get ready to plant it outside, well, I've got two options. I mean, the first option is to dig a hole that freaking deep. I mean, that's one option, because I only want about that much of the plant to even be coming out the ground. So digging a hole, I mean, my gosh, that's probably about 16 inches. That's 16 inches deep. That's kind of unrealistic. You know what I'm saying? So is what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to come down here. I'm going to do a trench method with these. Is what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these little first little leaves that come off. This gives the plant food it needs and sunlight to start producing photosynthesis before these leaves come off and start producing. But I'm going to cut those off. I'm going to cut this one off, cut that one off, cut this off, and I'm going to go up here and I'm going to cut this one off, and I'm going to cut this one off. So basically, I'm going to cut all the leaves off besides these this top bunch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay the tomato plant on its side. I'm going to lay the tomato plant on its side, just like that. And what that's going to do is that's going to force this top part to start bending upward. So I want it to start bending upward. That way when I trench it, I can trench the obviously not styrofoam cup, but the soil that's in here, and I'm going to trench it all the way up until this little section right here where that first little arm is coming off. What that's going to do is this whole big stem right here is going to shoot out roots. It's going to create roots because tomatoes have these little hairs. And if you've ever researched about cloning, when the suckers take off, and speaking of suckers, come to think of it, I'm really shocked that the suckers haven't started popping out in the armpit right here. I don't know. Maybe it's lacking some fertilizer. It is looking a little sad, but I think once I get it in the ground, I think it's just ready to get in the ground. I honestly do. I think that's what it is. I think it's ready to get in the ground and start producing. So I think I really need to get this bad boy in the ground. I probably need to give it some water. But yeah. So on tomato plants, so the suckers, especially indeterminate tomato plants, is what you can do is you can cut those suckers off. You know, once they start growing and they start spitting out, you know, at least two, you know, they start making the Y. Here, let me turn this around and I can talk to you. So once the tomato plant starts, the actual sucker piece of it, once it starts breaking off in its little branches, is what you can do is you can cut the sucker off right at the very base, and you can put it in some very wet potting soil. Now this only works on, well actually it works on indeterminate, but, or I'm sorry, it works on both determinate and indeterminate, but you don't want to clone a determinate plant or a determinate tomato plant. That's just a waste. So on an indeterminate plant is what you can do. You can take that little sucker, and once it produces at least two, bare minimum two, but you know, you can let it go. But once it gets about 8 inches tall, 6 to 8 inches tall, is what you can do is you can cut that sucker right off at the base, and then you put it in some really wet potting soil. And is what it'll do is it'll start growing hairs, because that's just what, well, those hairs on the sucker will create roots. So that's the cool thing about tomatoes. So if you find a really strong plant, and I call it a mother plant, but if you've, and that's really all I'm going to do with these. I planted so many tomato plants, you know, and I weeded out the weak ones, and then the ones that actually are super strong out of the few I've got left, I'm going to identify a mother plant, and from that mother plant I'm just going to start clipping clones. So last year I did a clone experiment on a beefsteak tomato. It didn't do anything. It tried to produce tomatoes, but it was a really bad strain of a beefsteak. I mean, that thing was garbage, but the clone worked. So that was the big test, to see if the cloning worked. And is what I did is I took off the sucker, and I put it in really damp soil for about 2 weeks, and that thing started taking off and growing. I mean, those little hairs started sprouting out roots and everything. So that's the cool thing about indeterminate tomato plants. If you find a really, really healthy one, let the sucker grow, and you know, clip it off, stick it in there, and you'll have a duplicate tomato plant. You know, you can kind of extend your season, especially if your mother tomato plant outside is getting an uncontrollable, you know, height or width. It just starts growing out of control, producing you a lot of tomatoes. That's good. You can clip the suckers and start a brand new tomato plant, a little bit more compact, and you can rip up the mother plant if you want, or whatever. Just start taking clones off of it, because eventually the tomato hornworms is going to eat it all up unless you just kill them. So you can start new plants like that. But I think the trench method is exactly how I'm going to have to go on this. So that's one option. The other option, like I said, is, you know, if you want to dig like 16 to 18 inches into the ground, you can do that. But that's freaking crazy. I mean, I'm not trying to dig 16 to 18 inches in the ground just to bury those to where there'll only be like 3 inches popping up. That's just silly to me. So I'll definitely trench them. When I trench them, now this will be the first year I trench them, but when I trench it, I definitely want to try to get it at least 6 inches into the ground. I want to kind of get it, you know, as deep as possible, especially the root ball. Get that as deep as possible, and then start kind of trenching upward, you know, so that it can make the bend and turn, because once the sun hits it, it's gonna shoot straight up and start creating foliage and everything like that. So I'm at 13 minutes right now, almost 13 and a half minutes, but that's pretty much it. I just kind of wanted to share with y'all, you know, so if you get your tomato plants inside like I did, and you're growing them inside, and they start growing really, really tall, and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Do I have to start over? You don't have to start over at all. All you got to do is just do the trench method when you plant them, and you'll be fine, because they'll shoot out roots, and then you can only, I mean, and then you can leave like, you know, 3 or 4 inches above the soil, and that'll be your plant. So hope this video helped. Let me show you the tomato plants again. So that's how tall it is. You know what I'm saying? So that's okay. So if you're gonna trench it, or if you're gonna dig 16 to 18 inches, make sure you cut off everything, all the little branches you see, and only leave, you know, about 3 to 4 inches up, and you'll be fine. And that is going to start really bushing out. Maybe even bury it right here, because up to right there, because you don't want the leaves to touch the ground unless you mulch really, really heavy. But even then, you don't want them to touch the ground. You really want it to start either single stemming or double stemming the tomato. That way you've got 2 main branches coming up, or even 3 main branches coming up, and then you want to definitely prune those around the bottom. You want as much airflow as in the bottom as you possibly can get. That's super important with tomatoes. You don't want the leaves to touch the ground. Very bad news. So anyway, let me bring you back around to me real quick. So anyway, I hope that helped. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up if it helped you out. Share it with your friends, family, whatever. Anybody that may need to, you know, is in the same situation I'm in, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is a lost cause. It's not a lost cause. Tomatoes are really resilient plants, so you're pretty much good to go. Anyway, give me a thumbs up, comment, like, rate, subscribe. Till next time, peace.